From the pages of Mary Shelley's groundbreaking novel to countless films, stage adaptations, and cultural reinterpretations, we're exploring both the creator and the creature as they continue to electrify audiences more than 2 centuries later. We're talking about Frankenstein. Here we go. And here we are again for another episode of Greatest Characters in Pop Culture History. I am Nick, and my guest today again is Stephen Van Patten. Brooklyn native. I am a Bronx native. He's the author of the critically acclaimed Brookwaters Curse trilogy and the Killer Genius series. Is that a trilogy, or how many books have been in the Killer
It's
Genius?
actually, so funny you should bring that up. The book, the manuscript for 3 actually just went to the editor
Awesome.
yesterday. So hopefully by Halloween, I should have a little something for everybody. And then it will be a trilogy.
That's fantastic. So read his books, and you might want to check out our prior episode, which we talked about Dracula. And SVP, that was the most popular episode that I've done, and it's all thanks to you.
Well, you know what? I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I look at these things as joint efforts.
Yeah.
No matter what.
But that was a lot of fun. We talked about Dracula, and today we're talking about Frankenstein, which some people would say was the very first science fiction novel, or at least a modern science fiction novel. Whereas other fantasy stories and horror stories, they looked at the fantasy element, supernatural element, and this one kind of looked at scientific experimentation causing the monster and creating the monster. What was your first exposure to Frankenstein? Was it the Universal horror movies? Was it Hammer films?
It was,
the
it was
novel
definitely
itself?
Universal.
Okay.
It was definitely Universal stuff first.
Uh-huh.
You know, because like I think I've said a few times, you know, I was watching all this stuff way young. And he came along with Dracula and the Wolfman and everybody else. And with the Universal stuff, you know, as a kid, you're watching that, and it's also like fascinating because it's like they're supposedly separate, but then in the Universal world, they're coming together.
Mashed them up.
And they're duking it out, and they're doing all this crazy stuff. And then of course the actors themselves are interchanging a little bit, because Karloff, of course, was the quintessential Frankenstein, but Lugosi took a hit at it once.
Yeah.
You know, and a few other, I'm blanking on the gentleman that was in the classic Abbott and Costello meet
Yeah, was
Frankenstein.
that Glenn Strange, right? He was in a few.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Glenn Strange, Glenn something. I know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the funny thing about the book, I had not read the book because, you know, I was always more of a vampire head. But in 10th grade, I had this very rough English teacher. For the life of me, I can't necessarily remember his name, but I remember 2 things about him. He hated people being late with their homework, and he was a massive Giants fan. So he'd actually spend a good, like in football season, which is when the semester was kind of happening, he'd spend a lot of time talking about the Giants, maybe a little more than he should have, considering we're supposed to be in English class. But ironically, I had fallen behind on finishing Frankenstein. So I did a really sneaky thing. I basically played hooky so I could, but the way I did it was kind of nuts because my mother had left for work, and my stepfather, who was at that time, he was like driving a cab or whatever. So he was asleep. So I just never left the house. And then I just kind of like blocked because, you know, there's like that little space underneath the door. So I blocked that with a towel, finished the book, right? Or at least I had gotten really far into the book by like, you know, 3:30. He's waking up. So just as he's waking up, I come out of the bedroom with my jacket and my bag. I wave at him real quick, and I go back in the room, and then I spend the rest of the night finishing the book. That's a horrible thing to admit to, but well, maybe. I don't know. Look, I got an A on the report. So
there you go.
That's the main thing. Yeah, and just sitting there and just reading that all at once, like that fast. Normally, you think you might have like missed something or whatever, but I really feel like reading it under the conditions that I read it actually really gave me a really good, clear understanding of what was going on, which is why I've always been of a mind that, along with it being like one of the first and the seminal sci-fi horror situation that it is, it's also one of the first walkthroughs that we get in daddy issues.
Of course. Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's so many analogies and things and what like you really have to give Mary Shelley all the credit.
Hmm.
It's just like it just so layered. That's why like with all of these movies, which, and we talked about this a little bit before we got on, is like it's an exhaustive list of and everybody kind of took a different angle, so to
Hmm.
speak. Sometimes the monsters um just kind of like very brutish. Remember Christopher Lee, speaking of another person that has been both Dracula and the
Yep.
monster. Christopher Lee's version was, I mean, watching it as a little kid, it's just like, oh my God. Because really all he says, I mean, but of course he didn't speak a lot as Dracula either, but he really doesn't say anything as Frankenstein. And he didn't meet anybody he didn't want to choke. And that was different way different from what the book put out, of
Hmm.
course. And, and it's funny because we have this recent version, this Netflix thing that just came out.
Guillermo del Toro.
Yes. And what's interesting is, well, a few things are interesting in the sense that, so I happen to know one of Mary Shelley's descendants. I know her through the Horror Writers
Really?
Association. Yeah.
That is so great.
And she did not like the movie.
The more
um,
recent one.
The recent one, she did not like
Okay.
it. Said as much on social media, and I was just like, ooh, because I was going to say something and maybe make some jokes and whatever. One joke I did make on social media, of course, was the fact that this is like the first time that the ladies have really been like, oh my God, Frankenstein, he like Frankenstein. You know what I'm saying? So that was
Yeah,
one thing that
between Wuthering Heights and Frankenstein,
yeah,
the
like, dude,
actor
yeah.
had like a pretty good year for those kind of roles, right?
And that, and because the thing is, I liked it.
I liked it too.
I
I mean,
didn't
it
go looking
wasn't
for a
perfect,
conversation with her.
but
No, of course, no.
I
What believe
enjoyed
us.
it.
There were the one thing that did kind of bug me was the fact that they kind of gave him this like Wolverine healing factor. I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
wait, time out. Wait, now does he have an adamantium skeleton too? Like, what are we doing here?
And he's got superpowers, like super strength. He's
Man,
leaping around.
Man, and it wasn't overly violent, but when he got ready to fight, bat, 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 bat,
Oh,
bat,
there
it
was
was
that one person where he like ripped them apart,
yeah,
man. It was
crazy. But
yeah.
all of that said, I felt like it was also like a love letter to the character.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like, because what I got from it was they took so much more of the few tender moments in the book and expanded them
Hmm.
and gave them this great backdrop, and it just so rich and and the separation, the rejection by the doctor slash father, they really ramp that up in a way that contemporary, I want to say contemporary 2026 people, 2025 people can kind of look into. I think again, just going back to the whole being rejected by your parent
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah, it's been interesting to see what the different angles are. I mean, there's the basic beats. He wants to bring a body. He starts getting pieces together, and maybe he has Igor, maybe he has some well-meaning guy that's like, no, 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 I don't think you want to do this. And there's always a love interest in some of the movies. Of course, the love interest is treated very well, and in some of the cases, the love interest is not treated very well at
Not
all.
very well.
I'm talking to you, Peter Cushing. Yeah, he was not nice to not even so much not nice to the fiance. He had a side piece,
Hmm.
and it's funny. I felt like that was actually one of the things they used in the Peter Cushing, I want to say it was Curse of Frankenstein, the way they kind of used that as a way to drive the sort of the nail in the head. So like, yes, this guy's an asshole. It's
Hmm.
not just that he's defying God. He's
Yeah.
also just not a nice guy. And sometimes he is a nice guy, depending on,
Hmm.
the movie or whatever. But ultimately, yeah, his conceit gets the best of him. That's the one thing that's consistent in pretty much all of them.
Yeah, whether it's like Oscar Isaac, right, in the more recent one, whether it's Peter Cushing, whether it's
Mhm.
Colin Clive from the Universal one, Dr. Frankenstein is this mad scientist trope that's been created by Mary Shelley,
Mhm.
and he can be sympathetic. Some renditions of it, he has motivation. He does things because he wants to experiment and
Mhm.
find the secret to life and bring people back. And then others, he just wants the power of God to just create life. You bring up the daddy issues. Like in the more
Mhm.
recent one, Guillermo del Toro's version, he abandons him right away. And you see
Right
that
away.
sympathy. And when he's seeing the other family, the monster, the
Mhm.
creature, he sees them touching the little kid's head and he starts touching his own head. Like he would like to be petted. He would like to be held and hugged. And, it's like, it's
Mhm.
kind of simplistic and, a little silly too when you see him just tapping his head. But it's also kind of heart touching a little bit, because he doesn't
Yes.
have that connection. He's been abandoned by his creator.
Mhm.
And Mary Shelley in the book, the monster reads like Milton's Paradise Lost and
Mhm.
all the stuff relating to Lucifer and being abandoned and, Prometheus, the Titan, being abandoned by the Greek and Roman gods. And that's kind of what this is. It's like your maker has left you, you know? It's
Mhm.
really it's a gothic story, but it's also a romantic story. So
Mhm.
Mary Shelley created this amazing thing. Have you ever done things like that? The story was created during the story writing contest. It was the year without a summer, so there was a volcanic eruptions they think that caused it, but that summer was really cold, so
Mhm.
they couldn't go outside, so they were trapped inside this place, and they just had this challenge. They're like, let's write a ghost story, and she comes
Yes.
up with Frankenstein. So have you had situations like that where you and a bunch of friends or fellow writers were just like, yeah, let's see what story we can come up with,
Not in a structured competitive way, but I mean, I belong in writers groups, and actually, I have one that we meet every Monday at 8 o'clock. As long as I'm not stuck on the show here. Um,
Sorry.
yeah, yeah. No, no, it's all good. And it's not like competitive. It's more like we just post something we're working on in Google Docs, and everybody kind of like takes a swipe at it. It's like, and it's been helpful with my short story stuff because, like Mary Shelley, so she tells you this story about a guy that, electrifies a bunch of corpse pieces together and comes up with this thing, which when you look, kind of look under the hood, there's really nothing else to see because, like a lot of our favorite fictions, there's a little junk science involved.
Of
Now,
course.
you and I both know that if somebody belted us with gamma rays, we would not turn into the Hulk. We would be in Mount Sinai going through chemo. The junk science has always been this foundational thing that gets us to either, Spider-Man or
Exactly.
whatever. So in a lot of ways, I feel like he was one of like the first ones between him and Dr. Jekyll. They were the first junk science created creatures, so to speak. And I mean, and I love them for that. Like, don't get me wrong. It's funny because the one, like, just to kind of get my mind set for this conversation, I did breeze through a couple of things real quick. And one thing I noticed, just on top of, all the like similar themes and a lot of them having the similar beats and like, I want to say probably the Kenneth Branagh version being the closest to following the actual book,
Yeah.
along with all that, just the like, if you wanna do a Frankenstein movie, you need, like, the scratch for set design, the scratch for props, and as we've gotten to be more sophisticated, of course, it's even more and more elaborate. Going back to the Guillermo del Toro scene where he reanimates a body and, with a bunch of scientists and whatever, which you don't see that in a lot of them because that's a complicated thing to shoot, I would imagine.
Mhm.
I've seen it. The matter of fact, one of the few places I remember seeing it. This movie was told from Igor's perspective,
Okay.
so it was Daniel Radcliffe. So Daniel
Yes.
Radcliffe as Igor, and James
Yes.
McAvoy as
I think the movie was Victor Frankenstein,
Victor
right? But it was
Frankenstein.
told
Right,
from the perspective of Igor, who was played by Daniel Radcliffe.
right. Because that's interesting too, because that was probably the first time I've ever seen Igor
Yes.
played as the sympathetic character. Monster, not so much in that one. I did like the monster design in that one. Like, that was like, if Marvel needed to use Frankenstein for whatever reason, that
There
I
you
think
go.
would be the blueprint for that. Unless again they're trying to get, you know, a bigger female audience, in which case, let's go back to my man over here, 'cause, but yeah, it's like all these different angles, all these different things, but yeah, the set design is quintessential at this point because you have to
Mhm.
create this massive lab and the whole thing with the electricity and, the what was it? It was one movie, it was like was going back to the McAvoy movie. It's like they
Mhm.
had something called a Lazarus fork. I thought
Okay.
that was clever.
Mhm.
It's like, "Oh, okay. Alright, I see what you're doing there. Okay."
Yep.
And it's interesting as you go from movie to movie, like, it's like, "So who am I supposed to feel sorry for this time?" And who like, there's at least one sympathetic lady, and sometimes it's the bride, if they decide to include her. And I just saw The Bride.
The one with, Jesse, right, who just won the Oscar.
Yes,
Um, yeah, and
and Christian Bale,
yes,
you know,
as
a
Frank the
as
monster.
Frank. Yeah, I gotta tell you, that caught me by surprise,
Uh-huh.
and what really caught me by surprise is the sort of veiled shout out, if you will, to Young Frankenstein, which, of course,
Which is
one of the
brilliant.
funniest movies
Yeah,
ever made.
and so tied in so perfectly with the
Oh,
Universal movies, you know?
yes.
A lot of people look at it as part of canon, as part of that whole series because it was so good, even if it was played for laughs, but just so was Abbott and Costello, right? So
Yes, yes, easily. And with Abbott and Costello, that was the monster Abbott and Costellos, in general, great. It was
Invisible
just
Man,
amazing.
all of 'em, yeah.
So funny. And then that's the other thing, of course, is when he's played as a sympathetic character.
Mhm.
That's when I like him the best, to tell you the truth. I mean, anybody can, run around and grunt and strangle people,
Yeah.
no disrespect, no, never disrespect to Christopher Lee, but I like it better because that gives you layers. I like it when they reference that he's hit a book or two,
Yeah, which was in
you
the
know?
book, and then in the original novel. He
Yes.
can talk, he speaks, and he speaks like Shakespearean, like, he learns to
Mhm.
speak that way, and then but we've known so much from the Boris Karloff version where he just becomes this brute and only learns to speak in, like, the 2nd movie and then loses his voice in the future movies. Did you know that Bela
Mhm.
Lugosi was the one that they were first thinking of to cast,
I
but
think I did hear that.
he didn't do it, and then you got Boris Karloff. But then, of course, Bela Lugosi comes back and actually plays the monster in one. He played Igor in one of them,
Yes,
and then
he certainly did.
he played the monster. And the caricature that we know now of Frankenstein with his arms out and just that's all Bela Lugosi actually,
Yep.
because in that movie the monster's blind, but those scenes were like cut out, so it became this
Mhm.
butcherized version. So all we see is just him like kind of. It looks like he's overacting, but he's actually characterizing what the character was like in that script where he had become blind and lost his voice. So all that we owe to Bela Lugosi, you know?
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, and that's kind of a wild fight scene too,
Yeah.
because it was Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
Yes.
So that's those 2 sorta duking it out. And that was interesting too, because like, so what they ended up having Lon Chaney do is he'd scuffle, 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 then he'd run and climb up on something and jump on him again, scuffle, scuffle, scuffle. Or as one of my favorite stand-up comedians, Tony Baker, like when he makes these voiceovers is where people are getting assaulted by their cats. He does like this thing in the voiceover where he calls that skibbity paps. So that was kind of like a big man version of skibbity paps because it was like he would just run up, then and then come
Nice.
back and he get thrown away. It was kind of funny.
Those movies were so good. It was
Oh my
so good.
god.
Yeah.
It's like, and they don't show them anymore. You literally have to pay Amazon more money because
Yeah.
that's what Amazon needs, more money to see these things. It's kind of a drag, but
Yeah.
that's our world now.
Yeah. So we were talking about Mary Shelley and how she was inspired by all this. There's talk. Well, the name, it's Frankenstein is meant to be the doctor, Dr. Frankenstein.
Mhm.
And the full title is Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. And a lot of people, when they think Frankenstein, they think of the monster, but the monster never had a name. So,
That's right.
sometimes we've come to call him Frankenstein.
Mhm.
And, there's versions where Dr. Frankenstein, Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who becomes Henry Frankenstein in the Universal movies,
Mhm.
it's so many variations of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
But in some versions, Dr. Frankenstein gives him his own name. So it is that father son dynamic and then just abandons him because he's like monstrous. And I'm like, what was he thinking? He's taking cadavers, taking pieces, sewing them together. The monster doesn't do anything monstrous when he's born. He comes alive. So it's almost like he's surprised that this monstrosity is born out of his
Mhm.
own work. And so he just abandons him. He's like, throws him out. So of course he wants to be loved and accepted. And he's like, what's wrong with me? And then eventually he wants a mate. He's like, okay, make another one of me. Make someone else that I could be with. And in the book, he gets all nervous because he's like, what are you going to do? You're going to breed and make a bunch of these monsters taking over the world, And I feel bad calling him a monster, like they call him a creature or they call him, a creation because he is sympathetic. He becomes
Mhm.
violent because of rejection and abandonment. You
Yes.
know,
There's an old African proverb, and it's, "The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth."
that's profound.
And yeah, and that really, like, when the movie or other, because there's lots of people out there also writing Frankenstein future speculative fiction stuff. And in all of those instances, it's like that's where the anger comes from. It comes from that rejection. It comes from, "Hey, you made me, and we're not gonna, like, what are we doing? Like, where are you going?" It's like that kind of thing. See, it's like, "You created me not to love me." And that's hurtful. Like,
Very.
ugh. Like, I can't even,
Mhm.
So, yeah, of course, he's beating the hell out of people every once in a while. Regular people go through that and don't necessarily have bolts coming out of their necks or anything like
Mhm.
that, but they end up at, what's the old saying? "Hurt people hurt people." Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
totally that's why, there's so many things that are woven into that original story that you can then bounce other things off of.
Mhm.
A friend of mine is doing a thing where the monster is in New York in the 30s, kinda not exactly what's happening with the bride. He's blending in a lot better than Christian Bale's character, not to give away anything to, people who are gonna get mad and be like, "I haven't seen it yet. What's the matter with you, Steve?"
Where's that
Um
spoiler alert?
Exactly. Oh my god. And I like stuff like that. I actually, just this past Christmas season, I wrote a poem, and it's an encounter between the monster, because I don't call him, like, I would have to meet him and then for him to tell me I can call him Frankenstein in order.
Gotcha.
I'm a purist like that.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, "No, no, no. He wasn't given a name,
Mhm.
just like Jon Snow is a bastard with the last name Snow.
Exactly.
You gotta abide by the rules." So, oh yeah, it's a kind of a conversation between Frankenstein and Santa Claus. So yeah, and I'm not the first person to, and all I did was a poem really, but there's people out there doing all kinds of stuff. And a lot of it's amazing because a lot of it especially plays into that guy who came in innocent, made a whole bunch of mistakes, maybe got chased around by some villagers, definitely felt the neglect and the just general malaise that came with being abandoned, and then somehow starts to figure stuff out. And maybe he gets the bride, maybe he doesn't. But the thing is like, when he starts pulling it together, then he becomes a cool guy.
Mhm.
His face is a little messed up, things like that. I don't know if you saw this. Penny Dreadful.
That's one I wanted to see, and I've heard so
So,
much about it. Yeah.
so good. And kinda like this thing with the bride, the bride in Penny Dreadful was mean as hell. But my guy, when they first kinda introduce him, he's actually a stagehand in a theater.
Interesting.
And I was like, "That's brilliant." Because and just speaking from, the other part of my life where I stage manage, stagehand, one of the staples for that job is that you're strong physically.
Mhm.
And every last one of those guys that I know, every last one of them. And there's also a certain level of cleverness that comes with that gig, just in terms of, like, carpentry and tying knots and all that other stuff. And when I saw that, I was like, "Nice,
Yeah. And
nice."
you're staying in
Because
the wings,
you're staying in the wings, you're in the back,
you're
like
watching, but
me.
you're also, that's
Right,
that's
like
that's
me, you're
brilliant.
dressed in all black. Maybe you're helping with the lighting, maybe, but you're hidden,
Exactly.
hidden, but doing an artistic thing.
Hmm.
And it's actually, I was like that really, like, I was like, oh, that was that was almost as touching as Monster Squad when
Which was
Frankenstein
fun.
turns around and starts helping the kids.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, "Ah, aha,
Uh-huh.
okay, here we go. This is the Frankie I wanna see."
Exactly. They've done
Um
cartoons about him. They've done,
Oh,
you've had,
definitely.
versions of him like the Munsters, where Herman Munster is totally, a Frankenstein monster, straight out of the Universal design with the flat head and the bolts and the lightning bolt
Mhm.
scar on the forehead. Yeah, it's great. You mentioned the poetry. That's the character. I mean, he's what makes a monster? It's like the real monsters are the mob with the torches and the pitchforks that are going after him and trying to burn him down and
Mhm.
jumping to conclusions when he's with the little girl throwing daisies. In the movie, they make him kill the girl because he doesn't know any better. They're throwing
Right.
flowers, and he's like, "Oh, okay, we're playing. Let me throw you in the water. Oh, why aren't you getting out of the water? What's happening?" It's like,
Right.
poor guy. He didn't mean to kill her. But in the book, he's connects to poetry and the epic poems and, Shakespeare. So you've created something, taken pieces that have been discarded, and yet it's something we all kind of question. Why are we here? Why are we who we are? Why did we get abandoned? Why did God make us only to suffer? That kind of thing. It's like, this
Mhm.
is, you know, Mary Shelley really dug deep for like a ghost story. She came up with something pretty profound.
Yeah. I can't even imagine. So, I believe she marries, was it Percy Shelley?
Percy, yeah. So she wasn't married to him when she wrote it. So it was like Lord Byron, Percy, and Polidori, who wrote the Vampire,
Mhm.
right? And I played him in a stage production recently of Frankenstein. That was a lot of fun.
No kidding.
Yeah, we had a good time with that. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, the
Nick
whole
the
concept of
Thespian.
yeah, we had a good time.
Okay.
But that would I mean, it's like it's what a concept, just sitting around and she was inspired. They say she went down the river and saw the actual Frankenstein castle. There's a castle in Germany called Frankenstein
Mm.
Castle. So
Mhm.
she did not invent the name. It's a name that existed. And in that castle, apparently, there was a guy who had done experiments with cadavers. So she must have heard that story. Then at the time, people were talking about the occult and they were talking about galvanism, which was all this experimentation with electricity.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
they would shoot a bolt of electricity through a frog, a dead frog, and the muscle would start spasming, right? So they
Right.
start thinking, oh, does that mean we could bring it back to life? So all these weird scientific experiments that were going on at the time, and then apparently Immanuel Kant had called Benjamin Franklin the modern Prometheus because of his experiments in the 1700s with
Mhm.
electricity. So she must have heard all this stuff, and all this stuff kind of inspired her. Just like any writer, you get inspiration from certain things, but give her credit for taking all this and turning it into this story that just resonated with so many people. And the first edition that was published, she didn't even have her name on the byline. I think it was
That's
because
right.
she was a woman. But then in the second edition, a couple of years later, it did
Right.
say Mary Shelley. So give her credit. She did
Absolutely.
all this. And I love how in Bride of Frankenstein, they play her in the little preface, right? You actually
Mhm.
see that scene where they're coming up with the story. And that becomes the character that becomes the actual Bride of Frankenstein
Yes.
with the big hairdo and everything. So iconic. Only a few minutes of screen time, but I think she's one of the great universal horror monsters as well. And I
100%.
like that they're revisiting the character. They did The Bride in the 1980s with Sting, and I forget who else was in that movie, but then now The Bride more recently. So they're really investigating that character a lot as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, I have a crazy idea.
Okay.
Since I have the poem right here as published in Soul Scream Anthology by my man Christopher Ryan, should I give our listeners a little taste?
Sure. Go for it.
Okay. Let me just dig it up real quick. Right. It's December 23rd, and the monster is at the bar, sipping on a whiskey, his thoughts so deep and far. As a heavy set, bearded man slowly sauntered in and shouted, "A spiked eggnog for me, and another for my friend." He looked so serious in the face. Clearly, he's struggling. I'm here to help with whatever he's mentally juggling. The monster's eyes grew wide indeed. He did have cause. Wait a goddamn minute. Is that you, Santa Claus? What many don't know In fact, the two had met previously. When the monster's father died up north, he visited Santaland frequently. They shook hands and hugged. It had been a long while. The sight of one another had them both giving smiles. The curious monster asked Santa, "Why are you in New York?" Santa chuckled and said, you go first. The monster said, "New York's a place where I can work off the books. Couldn't stay in Santaland. How would that have looked?" Santa said, "You could have stayed. Your work would have been minimal." The monster just shook his head. "You forget I'm a wanted criminal?" "That leads us back to the reason I came here," the monster said. "Okay, let's hear it. I'm all ears. Guys like us are rare and endangered." "Guys like us? You must be kidding. You're loved across the globe." "That's far from true," Santa said. "Here's what you don't know. A lot of people see me as polarizing, and clearly I must have been fantasizing when I didn't anticipate there'd be any problem with attaching free toys to a baby in Nazareth. So, what started as a night to uplift souls grew into something I couldn't possibly control. I go through the motions and bring the noise, but do you have any idea how many girls and boys I'm forced to let down every December 25th? Or how many times I hear, 'Yo, Santa ain't shit.' There are just too many people walking on this earth, and all this publicity was never what it's worth. My very soul is irked, and I'm drowning in my shame. Even my enchantments just can't win this game. Yeah, sure, I have magic powers, but I can't satisfy entire nations. And as hard as I may try, I can't turn snow into PlayStations. So I do some things for a select few, and that's what brings me to why I'm here with you. You see, my friend, I know your story of pain, assembled mix of body parts, supposedly given the wrong brain, and a deep desire for something better that burns brighter in you than any Santa letter." The monster asked, "Wait, are you giving me a wife?" Santa said, "Even better, I'm going to fix your life." Santa waved a hand as the monster's face tingled. The monster started to worry. "What are you doing, Kringle?" "Trust me, kid," was all Santa said, as the monster suddenly felt very light in the head. In seconds, it was all over as abruptly as it began. Santa was beaming. "Look at you, like a brand new man." The monster felt he'd lose his mind as he saw the bar's far mirror. His eyes filled with joy as his vision became clearer. "You seem to have turned me into a very handsome man," Santa said. "Yes, old friend. That was exactly my plan." "Hey, you made me black. Was that part of your agenda?" Santa laughed. "Just my way of maintaining your sense of adventure. There's new idea in your pocket. Your name's now Adam Grimes. No longer are you a monster or a Frankenstein. I also gave you a full master's degree in English Lit. Coincidentally, there's a school in Brooklyn that could benefit. Santa, this is too good to be true. How do I even begin to thank you?" Teach those kids and teach them well, because there's a lot I can't fix with tricks and magic spells. They eventually finished their drinks and went their separate ways, each with renewed determination to make the world a better place. Christmases would come and go. Professor Grimes would teach his classes. He'd finally marry, have 2 kids, a life of lessons, lesson plans, and hall passes. And late every Christmas Eve, when Santa drove his sleigh, he'd stop. His final stop was the Grimes house, if only to just say hey. Professor Grimes' secret was safe. Anything else would be considered rude, and the former monster and his family would go on living with gratitude.
That's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
That is great. I could spend a while analyzing that one because there's a lot there to pick apart, to really delve into. You
Mhm.
name him Adam, right? That's one. That's a name that a bunch of people, right? Because he
Yep.
was the first man. So that's a name where when a lot of other people who've adapted it name it Adam. Some have called him Caliban. Some have called him like the son of Prometheus.
Mhm.
But that's pretty cool. And you talk about the abnormal brain, right? So
Yep.
I
Yep.
just love in Young Frankenstein, Abby Normal.
Abby normal.
I just love that. But how
Oh my god.
abnormal must it have been? Because he still is thoughtful. He still has compassion. And yeah, he gets psychotic when, he's been abandoned. But, if you have super strength and you lose your temper, I think you'd be breaking bones and crushing people. And if they're coming after you with pitchforks and torches.
Oh, yeah.
I think
No,
anybody.
I mean, that's self-defense.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's some Swedish person that,
Uh-huh.
maybe lost a relative in a riot
Yeah.
who would not feel the same. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
oh my God.
Yeah. But Santa Claus too, not the Saint Nick of history, but the Santa Claus that we come to know, giving gifts and going down chimneys, that all started from a poem, right? Clement, right? I Clement Moore. So this is a good bookend to that. I think that's pretty cool. And you
No,
see
thanks.
Santa Claus doing crossovers. He did it in South Park, right? The first pilot episode for that.
Yeah,
So I could see this being a pilot episode for Adam doing other things. So that's pretty cool.
thanks.
Well, how did you get inspired to write that?
Well, it was funny. So Chris Ryan is a friend of mine, and he, like I said, he puts out these Soul Scream anthologizines, and he um he originally asked for just baseline short
Mhm,
Christmas horror stories, right? And I actually gave him a reprint of something I had done a long time ago. This thing, Naughty.
mhm.
Naughty has a lot of salty language in it. And I'm gonna just put that to the point where I had to tone it down for Christopher's specific audience. But the original version had people asking me, do I have issues with Christmas? Or do I dislike Christmas? Because the premise of Naughty is there's a succubus,
Mhm,
not a succubus, an incubus, because an
mhm.
incubus is the male version. And succubus, incubus, they're basically demons who feed on sex energy. And so the story is about an incubus that pretends it's Santa Claus.
Wow.
So basically what happens is during gift giving season, he gives a little more than gifts. I mean, he gives a gift, but it's not under the tree. And he's confronted by this guy who's married to this woman, and there's clearly been some shenanigans. And so it starts off with just the regular old just leaving the plate or whatever, and then they have a really nasty argument, and there's a lot of descriptive talk. So yeah, after I had handed that in, it suddenly hit me to do something more Christmassy.
Yeah.
So after I handed him that and we kind of pared it down a little bit for the people that were going to buy this specific book, then I said, you know what, just for, shits and giggles, I'm gonna write this poem. And I wrote it like in a couple of hours, something
Uh-huh.
like that. And I just sent it over, and
That's
it
fun.
made the cut last minute. But yeah, I guess that's evidence of the fact that I've always looked at Frankenstein very differently from all the other monsters, including my guy Dracula and the rest of the team, so to speak.
Yeah. And when you do these kind of anthologies and an editor comes up to you with these ideas, it's almost like Mary Shelley hanging out there during that dark and stormy night. And they were
Mhm.
like, let's come up with some ghost stories. They're reading Phantasmagoriana or whatever that French compilation of ghost stories were. So they're all in the mood for ghost stories.
Right.
And she takes it to a different level, making it a science fiction story that, you know, not just, vampires but I like the connection of vampires and wolfmen and, all these monsters working together. So Universal really made like a shared universe and all
Mhm.
these sequels. I'm sorry that Bela Lugosi didn't get to play Dracula too much until, thank goodness for the Abbott and Costello movie. He finally got his chance to do it
Mhm.
again. But he got to play, and Lon Chaney Jr. played Frankenstein's monster a couple of times as well. It's something about the makeup kind of playing it, but you see when Boris Karloff does it, he really brought something to it.
He
He
yeah, he totally did.
you know, I mean, he had dentures even though he was so young when he started, but he just took them out and made his face all gaunt, and,
Mhm.
so it's good. And he played Doctor Frankenstein as well. Like, he
Yes,
played
that's
another doctor a couple of times. Like, he did a movie, Frankenstein 1970, I think, but also
Mhm.
in, whether it was House of Frankenstein or one of those others, he came back as he wasn't the original Doctor Frankenstein, but he was, in the mold of
Mhm.
the mad scientist and stuff. So it's great seeing him do that kind of stuff, the versatility of it. Anything else that we've left out? We Frankenberry and all these other things that have become part of. And we talked about the Chocula cereal when we talked about the Dracula episode, but did you like the Frankenberry cereal when you were a kid, or you were
I
more
was
the
more a Count Chocula guy. I mean,
Count Choc?
I enjoy I tell you something funny, I don't know if we talked about this in the Dracula episode, but somebody made a meme of me on the cover of the
You've
Count
told me
Chocula
that,
bust.
yes.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever got to see it.
I don't think I did, but you
I'll
should
have
send it
I'll
to
have to
me.
I have to send it to you. Yeah, and then one of the camera guys I've worked with over the years, he was like, "Well, what can I be? What can" he wanted a meme, so they made him Frankenberry,
Nice.
which if you knew the guy, that's actually he's actually a good pick.
That's great.
So yeah, let's see. Yeah, so speaking of the monster as a tender creature, there was the House of Frankenstein that I think I want to say it was like 1997 or 5 or somewhere in there. And it's by today's standards, it's like uh but the guy playing the monster, he was very sweet. They when I talked about the Netflix movie and how they played to the tender parts of the
Mhm,
book, they definitely like he had like they really expanded on the meet a blind lame person, so to speak,
mhm.
and befriend them, and that's what he did, and it was so then, of course, when Dracula comes and hurts that person, that's just sets up all kinds of crazy drama and whatever, and it's set in LA, and it's this, very typical hard-boiled detective thing. He has the sense to be nice to the monster too and everything else like that. For some reason, that kinda just popped back in my head
Yeah.
because, um, like I said, I like that he's kind of in a lot of the speculative stuff, people are kind of pointing him more towards being a warrior poet,
Mhm.
and that's what I appreciate.
Yeah, and they when we did Dracula, I realized just how many adaptations they've done of him, but
Mm,
they've done a lot of Frankenstein adaptations too. They turned him into superheroes, right? He's in Doom Patrol, and he was that movie
yes,
I, Frankenstein, and, they've done parodies of him. Phil Hartman in Saturday Night Live, it was like that
true.
version of him was everywhere. We talked about the monsters, and Addams Family. Lurch is kind of a Frankenstein kinda
Oh, totally,
creature, I think.
totally.
You had Rocky Horror Picture Show and Weird Science, that whole trope of, creating something and mad
Mhm,
scientists, Frankenhooker and Frankenweenie and all these, just spoofs and parodies and just writers. Edgar Rice Burroughs did like a parody of Frankenstein. And
mhm,
Dean Koontz has done stories, Brian Aldiss has done stories. I mean, you could go on and on.
yep,
So I'm not surprised that just in the last 2 years alone, you had the Guillermo del Toro version, The Bride. I think they're just gonna keep coming up with stories, uh, forever,
mhm,
And I would love to I'd love to read your, poem in more depth, and just see more stories that come out. You can do anthologies of Frankenstein, and you get so many writers coming up with different takes and different versions of it.
absolutely.
But you're still more of a vampire guy than a Frankenstein guy, but at least they have a connection. They go together.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
you know, it's all good.
I had a
So,
visitor.
was that Igor knocking? He's got
No,
another
right,
cadaver.
no, no, no. It's a
That's all
very
right.
nice lady coming to check the garbage.
You got it. So, I'm just really glad that you were able to talk to me again, and you came back after our first adventure talking about
Sure.
Dracula.
It's
And I hope
always
yeah.
This is always fun.
Yeah, and I hope we can talk about other characters down the road, but I am with Stephen Van Patten, who is a great author. Any of you who want to check out his stories, I'll put a link in the notes, and you definitely should because great, great fiction and stories. And now he's a poet, so he's great. So this is Nick, and I'm with SVP Stephen Van Patten, and I hope you all like, subscribe, share, comment, and we will see you next time on Greatest Characters in Pop Culture History.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Nick.